when, if ever, should you use empty alternative text? So for the HTML friendly among you, this little piece of code at the bottom, image alt is empty, basically. And it's worth understanding, if you don't know, that is actually different from not specifying alt text. So you could literally just do an image and not specify it at all. Or you could do an image and you could specify an empty alt text. And that is actually different, believe it or not. A lot of people don't know this. If you have an image and you don't specify alt text, most of the time the screen reader will do its best to guess what it should put in there. And its guesses are notoriously awful. So you will typically get something like an image. It will read out the file name of the image. And that is a really, really bad experience for, say, a blind user. When every time they get an image, what they have is, it reads out icon176.png or something. So for that reason, if nothing else, you should specify alt equals blank rather than omitting it entirely. But why would you do that? Why is that important? Well, let's just quickly recap what alt text is actually for. So this is an example of, say, 3 images in a fictional menu where you might ask someone to select from the following 3 options. And in this case, you're asking someone to pick between 3 images. So because I'm a sighted user, I can easily see what those images are, and I could choose and click on one of them. But if I was, say, blind or even just visually impaired to the point where I needed to rely on a computer to help me see those images, then I might use a screen reader, and a screen reader would read out those images. It would turn them into text. So it would say something like pear image, banana image, apple image. That's a quite common use of alt text. And the alt text here is that piece of text before the hyphen, right? So pear, banana, apple. Now, in this really simple and slightly contrived example, that is incredibly useful. This is, in fact, essential, actually. You couldn't really make this example accessible without providing alt text. And that's usually what people are taught. They're taught, just provide a text to describe the image. This is why it's important. But it's kind of simplifying it a bit. So let me show you a little bit more detail. This is a slightly more practical example where the absence of alt text is absolutely devastating to accessibility. So here you've got an example of instructions on how to charge a phone, right? And the image is actually showing you something that is not present in the text around it, right? So this image is showing you where to put the charger into the phone in order to actually charge it. Now, if you imagine you couldn't see that image, if that image was just deleted and all you got was the alternative text on the left, you just have the words charging phone. That is a very common example of alt text that people will provide. They'll just go, oh, this is image, charging phone, done. But if you actually think about what the image is trying to achieve, the example on the right is more practical. So this would say something like plug cable into the bottom edge of the phone. So it's actually describing the information that's relevant. And this, unfortunately, it can be quite tricky to make this judgment call, but you just want to think if the image is showing you something pertinent. So for example, if you had a graph showing coronavirus cases going up or down, your alternative text might need to say something like, graph showing increase of coronavirus cases from pretend 100 a day to 200 a day, or whatever it is, something like that. And you wouldn't want to put alternative text that just says chart or graph of coronavirus cases, because the crucial information inside it would be lost. The alternative is to write this text around it. So you don't put it in as alt text, but you make it somewhere else on the page. But as asked by the question, why would you sometimes not do this? Why would you omit this alt text if it's so useful? Well, here's another example menu, and this is probably the most common example, where you've got a selection of 4 options, but each option has text and it has an image next to it. So you've got auditory, visual, motor, and cognitive, and each one of these has an icon. So if you were to just do the obvious thing here, you provide alt text for those images, you might put something like ear receiving sound, or eye crossed out, or finger pointing as your alt text, right? So you would just add that alt text for each one of these images. But then what would actually happen for a user who is, say, experiencing your site through a screen reader, so someone who's, say, blind or partially sighted, they would have this read out to them. So they would hear ear receiving sound image, auditory link, and then I crossed out image visual link, and so on. So what's actually happening in many ways is you've made the experience worse. The alternative text is distracting. It's actually a burden on the user. And in fact, what you'd be better off doing is something like this. If you removed the alt text from those images, you would just have auditory link, visual link, motor link, and cognitive link, which would make for a much simpler and more accessible experience. So in this case, basically, the images, knowing those images and what's inside them is irrelevant, right? They don't actually add sort of the utility of this menu. They, in fact, would take away from it. If you're sighted, they're a nice little aid. And in fact, if you're dyslexic, they're particularly useful because you may struggle to read the text. But if you're partially sighted, then they're actually a hindrance. So in this case, I would recommend empty alt text for these images. Here's a quick cheat sheet for you. If the image is purely decorative, so it's like a sunset in the background or something, it doesn't need it. If you couldn't see the image, would important information be lost? If it is, then you definitely need alt text. And would alt text be duplicated? So for example, sometimes you have a picture of a car next to the word car. And if you set the alt text to car, then it would just say car image car, which is kind of pointless. So just avoid that if you can.